I sat at the long table, the sound of clinking glasses mingling with the hum of murmured conversations around me. It was supposed to be a celebration, my 32nd birthday. The family gathered at a lavish restaurant in Manhattan, the kind of place where the white tablecloths gleamed under the soft, amber glow of chandeliers, and the waiters moved with quiet efficiency, as if the world itself moved slower in these walls. But something in the air had changed. My mother-in-law, Linda Stroud, was holding something in her hand, an envelope, decorated with pink butterflies and silver script that caught the light as she set it down in front of me. I froze. "This is for you, dear," Linda said, her voice dripping with syrupy sweetness. I almost choked on my drink. I could feel the eyes of the family members around me narrowing, their attention shifting like a tide of suspicion. I'd been around them long enough to know when something felt off. I lifted the envelope, the weight of it unexpectedly heavy in my hands. A part of me already knew. Something told me this wasn't a birthday card. This wasn't a celebration. This wasn't love. This was a transaction. Linda had always treated me like an outsider, and I had learned long ago that nothing came without strings attached. "You're giving me a gift?" I asked, my voice steady despite the growing pit in my stomach. "Just a small token," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I thought it was time you took the next step." I tore open the envelope, only to reveal a thick stack of legal papers. I glanced down at the bold text, divorce petition. My stomach flipped, my pulse quickening. I tried to stay calm, but the room felt like it was closing in on me. I could feel Jack's gaze on me from across the table, his expression neutral, but his fingers tapping nervously on his wine glass. "Sign it, Maya," Linda continued, her voice cutting through the silence. "It's all very simple. Divorce, and you walk away with $5,000. No more drama, no more complications. Just a clean break." My heart raced. $5,000. The weight of the offer hung heavy in the air, as if the entire world was watching, as if this was all they thought I was worth. I looked down at the papers again. Jack's signature was already there, a line waiting for mine. Linda was grinning, clearly pleased with herself. The silence stretched, and I could feel the eyes of the table burning into me. I could already hear their judgment, their whispers. This was their way of throwing me out, of ridding themselves of the one thing they couldn't control, me. I shouldn't have been surprised. Linda had never liked me. From the moment I had married Jack, she had done everything in her power to make sure I felt small, insignificant. But this was a calculated move, a final blow. I leaned back, taking a deep breath. I could feel the heat of their anticipation, the sting of their expectation. Jack shifted in his seat, his eyes darting toward me, his nervous energy palpable. "You know, I've spent years trying to fit into your world," I said quietly, folding the papers back up. "Trying to play your game." I paused, looking at Linda, her expression a mix of smug satisfaction and thinly veiled contempt. "But what you don't know, Linda, is that I've been playing my own game all along." I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, tapping in a password that only I knew. My fingers moved, quickly, but with purpose. The transaction I had set up months ago had been a simple one. A secure offshore account where I'd invested smartly, quietly behind everyone's back. The numbers flashed on the screen, $72 million. Linda's smile faltered ever so slightly as she watched me, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. But I didn't look away. I stared back at her, a slow grin curling at the corner of my lips. The game had changed. "You think $5,000 will make me go away?" I asked, my voice low and steady. "What you don't know, Linda, is that I don't need your money." I placed the divorce papers down on the table, the weight of them nothing compared to the weight of the revelation that hung in the air. A silence fell over the room. Jack's hand trembled as he reached for his glass, his eyes now wide. I could feel the tension crackling between us. Linda's smile, once so self-assured, slipped from her face. "You think you're in control here," she hissed. "No," I said softly, leaning in. "But I know how to play a better hand." I watched as her face drained of color. Jack shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a flicker of realization crossing his face. But it was too late for them. The game was over. I had my own rules now, and they hadn't seen the last of me. "Sign it, and you can walk away with $5,000, she had said. I wasn't walking away. Not yet. The room fell deathly quiet as I stood up, the weight of their expectations and the weight of my secret both pressing down on me. I was done pretending. They have no idea what I'm really worth. The words echoed in my mind as I turned on my heel and walked toward the door, leaving them behind and stepping into a future they couldn't control. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The sting of the divorce papers still lingered. But it wasn't the betrayal that haunted me the most. It was the knowing that they thought they could control me. That was what had been gnawing at my insides, the audacity of it all. The plan had been set in motion. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't just the woman who married into money. I was a weapon. I sat at my desk in the dark, the glow of my laptop casting shadows on the walls of my penthouse. My fingers hovered over the keys as I pulled up my private accounts. The silence of the room felt oppressive, like something was waiting to break it. I knew the moment would come. The moment when the game I had been playing for years would be revealed. It was always about the money, wasn't it? Jack's family had never cared for me. They saw me as a temporary fixture, someone to fit into their well-polished world. But they never saw me as one of them. They thought I was just a trophy wife, someone who didn't know the value of hard work. They were wrong. There it was. I pulled up the investment portfolio that I had built long before Jack came into the picture. My investments weren't just safe, they were lucrative. $72 million. It wasn't much compared to the Stroud fortune, but it was mine. It always had been. And that secret, that was the one thing Jack and his mother had overlooked. I thought back to the night they handed me the divorce papers. Linda's smug face, her expectation that I'd crumble, sign the papers and disappear. $5,000, she had said. It was laughable, a slap in the face. But what they didn't know was that this whole time I had been building an empire behind the scenes, quietly and carefully. And now I had the perfect weapon. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing numbers on the screen. There was so much at stake, not just my future, but my dignity. What had Jack thought? That I would walk away? That his family could buy me off with a few $1,000s? How naive. But as the night dragged on, I knew this wasn't the end. The game was just beginning. The phone buzzed, snapping me back to the present. Jack. I stared at the screen for a moment and then slid it to the side. He was still sleeping, no doubt blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around us. There was no point in talking to him now. His mind was already made up. He and his mother had planned their little coup, and I had played right into it, but not anymore. I walked to the window and looked out over the city. The skyline glittered in the night like 1,000 tiny diamonds. But it wasn't the city I was watching, it was the shadows. The sense that someone was always there, watching, waiting. The feeling of being hunted. That was when the knock on the door came. I froze. It was late. Too late for anyone to be knocking on my door. I moved quickly, walking across the room with deliberate steps, my breath shallow. The knock came again, louder this time. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I peeked through the peephole. It was a man, dressed in a black suit, his face unreadable. He wasn't anyone I recognized. I pressed my back to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. The man spoke, his voice muffled through the door. "Miss Thompson, I need to speak with you." I glanced at my phone again. No missed calls from Jack. He wasn't behind this. I stepped back, my mind racing. There was only one thing I knew for certain. This wasn't just about a divorce. It never had been. Someone was looking for something, and I wasn't about to let them find it. "I'm coming back for everything you've stolen," I muttered to myself, watching the stranger on the other side of the door. He had no idea what he was walking into. A moment of stillness passed. The man knocked again, but this time it was more insistent. I swallowed hard and looked back at the computer screen. The numbers flashed at me like a beacon. $72 million. And it was only a matter of time before they came looking for it. I didn't need to answer the door. I already knew what had to be done. I grabbed my keys, my coat, and the file I had kept hidden, the one that held all the information I had about the Stroud shady dealings. Jack's affair, the offshore accounts, the fraud, it was all in there. Evidence they couldn't deny. The truth was coming, and I had the power to destroy them. I headed for the door, the man's voice still muffled through the wood. But just as my hand reached the handle, a thought struck me. They were playing their game, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. I opened the door slowly, the tension crackling in the air. "You're too late," I said, locking eyes with the man as he stepped forward. He looked at me with a blank expression, but I wasn't fooled. I had one card left to play, and I wasn't going down without a fight. The stakes had just been raised. The door clicked shut behind me, and the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. I had a choice to make, and I wasn't going to let them control the outcome anymore. "You'll regret this," I said, stepping into the unknown, knowing they were already too far in to turn back. The door clicked shut behind me with a finality that I could feel in the pit of my stomach. The moment I stepped into the hallway, I was aware of every creak of the floorboards, every breath I took. My shoes clicked on the marble, too loud in the otherwise silent night. I knew I was being watched. I didn't need to glance over my shoulder to feel the weight of it. Someone was out there, waiting for me to slip up. They were following me, no doubt. I took a deep breath and walked faster. The world outside my apartment was a blur of lights and sounds. I pulled my coat tighter around my shoulders as I made my way toward the elevator, trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I reached the street just as my phone buzzed. "Jack." I hesitated before answering. The conversation we had earlier was still fresh in my mind. His pleading, his empty promises that he would fix everything. It was the same song and dance I had heard 1,000 times. "Pick up," he texted. "Maya, we need to talk. Please." I almost laughed. He thought it was that simple, that a few soft words would fix everything. But how could I trust someone who had never seen me as anything more than a pawn, a tool in their family's game of power? I shoved my phone back into my bag, keeping my pace steady as I headed toward the car. I had a plan, and I wasn't about to let him or his family ruin it. The car was parked a few blocks away, hidden under the shadow of the buildings. I stepped inside, the engine rumbling to life as I slammed the door shut behind me. My fingers gripped the steering wheel as I sped toward my destination, the one place they would never expect me to go. The streets blurred as I drove faster. The city lights flickered past like a series of disconnected images, flashes of a world that didn't know me, didn't know the real me. I pulled up to a nondescript building on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place no one would look twice at. The sign above the door was small, almost hidden, Morrison Investments. I parked the car and checked the rearview mirror, scanning the street for anyone who might be following me. Nothing. Good. I stepped out of the car and walked quickly toward the entrance. The inside was dark and quiet, a far cry from the glitzy, polished world I had grown used to. This was where it had all started. The investments I had made years ago when I first realized that I needed a way out, a way to build my future, away from Jack and his family, away from the people who didn't see my worth. I pushed open the door and entered, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The receptionist barely looked up as I walked past her. She knew me well enough. I was a regular here, a shadow in the back of the room, a face with no name. But that was about to change. "Mr. Morrison is expecting you," the receptionist said without looking up. She pressed a button, and the elevator doors slid open. I nodded, stepping inside and pressing the button for the top floor. As the elevator ascended, I felt the tension building again. Every inch higher felt like it was pushing me closer to something I couldn't turn back from. I wasn't just here for information anymore. I was here for control. The doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped out onto the polished floor. Mr. Morrison's office was at the end of the hall, its door slightly ajar. I knocked once, the sound echoing in the hallway. "Come in," a deep voice called from the other side. I entered and closed the door behind me. The room was minimalist, all glass and steel, with a view of the skyline that almost seemed too perfect. But it wasn't the view that mattered. It was the man sitting behind the desk, watching me with a calm, calculating expression. "Maya," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I don't trust many people," I replied, taking a seat in the chair across from him. "But you've been helpful, and I need more than just help now." "I know what you need," he said, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. "You need a way out, a way to secure your future." "Not just my future," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "I need a way to take back everything they've stolen from me." There it was, the truth, the real reason I had come here. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't just about getting away from Jack and his family. This was about something deeper, something personal. It was about revenge, about making them pay for every insult, every betrayal. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "I assume you have the documents." I nodded. "I've got everything I need, but I need your help to make it disappear." He gave a small, knowing smile. "You want to make sure they can't trace it back to you." "Exactly." "Then let's get started." The next few hours were a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and strategic planning. But when it was done, I had what I needed, the upper hand. They had no idea what was coming. I could feel the tension in the air, thick with anticipation. I was about to turn their world upside down, and they wouldn't see it coming. I stood up to leave, my phone buzzing in my pocket. I didn't look at it. There was no need. I knew who it was. But as I turned to leave, a thought struck me. They think they control the game. I paused for a moment, looking back at the sleek office behind me. They were wrong. The game was mine now. I walked out of the building and into the night, my mind racing with the possibilities. Every step I took was a step closer to taking everything they had and making sure they never saw me coming. You never know what someone is capable of until they have nothing left to lose. I had nothing left to lose, and they were about to find out exactly what that meant. The night air was thick with tension as I walked through the alley to the back entrance of the building. The city's hum was muted here, a distant memory of a life that no longer belonged to me. I could feel eyes on me, even though I knew no one was around. The feeling was familiar, a shadow I'd carried with me for years. Ever since I'd become Jack's wife, the weight of surveillance had followed me like a curse. First, it had been his family, quietly watching every move I made, weighing my worth against their own image of the perfect daughter-in-law. Now, I knew that someone else had taken their place. The building loomed ahead, its brick walls cloaked in darkness. A few more steps, and I would be inside, where all the secrets of the game lay hidden. This was the final phase, the part where I pulled the strings. I pushed open the door and entered the office building. The air was cold inside, a sharp contrast to the muggy night outside. I took the stairs, avoiding the elevator. The higher I went, the more the building felt like a maze. A series of locked doors, hidden passages, secrets that only the right people had access to. I reached the floor I needed, the one Jack had never known about. The door at the end of the hall was unmarked, blending into the shadows. My hand hovered over the handle for a second before I twisted it open. Inside was quiet, too quiet. The room was small, dimly lit by a single desk lamp. A man sat behind the desk, his back turned to me. I knew him well enough. He was one of the few people I could trust in this game, someone who had played his own role in the puzzle I was putting together. But trust was a delicate thing, especially in my world. "You're late," he said without turning around. "I don't have time to waste," I replied, walking over to the desk. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick folder, setting it down in front of him. His eyes flicked to it, then back to me. He knew what it contained. "You've got the information?" he asked. "I have everything," I said, my voice steady. "Now it's your turn." He turned the chair toward me slowly, his face obscured by the low light. "You know what happens next," he said, his voice like gravel. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I stared at the papers in front of me, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about power, control, and the satisfaction of finally being the one in charge. "You're sure you want to do this?" he asked again, his voice softer this time, almost a warning. "I'm not asking for your permission," I said coldly, slamming the folder onto the desk. "Just do what we agreed on." He paused, the tension between us thickening. Then, with a sigh, he opened the folder. The contents inside were more than just a list of names or signatures. They were the keys to everything, the offshore accounts, the hidden assets, the transactions that Jack's family thought were buried. I watched as his hands flipped through the papers, his face unreadable. "You've done your part," he said finally, standing up. "It's time to make your move." I nodded, feeling the final piece of the puzzle click into place. But as I turned to leave, a voice echoed through the room, making me freeze. "Maya." I turned, my heart skipping a beat. There, standing in the doorway, was Jack. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You." His voice trailed off as he looked from me to the folder on the desk. "What have you done?" I could feel the walls closing in around me. "I've done what needed to be done," I said, my tone colder than I intended. "The game is over." Jack stepped forward, his footsteps heavy, his presence suffocating. "You think this is over?" His voice was low, almost dangerous. "You have no idea what you're getting into." I didn't flinch. "You and your family underestimated me," I said, meeting his gaze. "That was your mistake." His eyes darkened. "This isn't just about you and me, Maya. It never was. You've crossed a line you can't come back from." The words hit me harder than I expected, but I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. "You can't threaten me anymore, Jack," I said, turning to leave. But before I could reach the door, he grabbed my arm. "Don't walk away from me," he growled, pulling me back toward him. I could feel the heat of his breath on my neck, but I didn't react. Instead, I stared at him, my mind racing. There was no going back now. This was bigger than him, bigger than the lies, bigger than the family that had controlled my every move. "I'm done playing by your rules," I said, shaking off his grip. "And I'm done being your pawn." Jack stood there for a moment, speechless, before his gaze shifted to the desk. He finally understood what I had done. I wasn't the naive woman he thought I was. I wasn't the one who would crumble under pressure. "I'll make sure you regret this," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. But I wasn't listening anymore. I had everything I needed. I had control. And no matter how hard he fought, no matter what threats he made, there was no way for him to take that back. As I walked out of the office, I could feel the weight of his words lingering in the air, but I wasn't worried. He had no idea what was coming next. But I did. And it was time to make them all pay. The sharp click of the lock behind me echoed down the empty hall, the final sound before silence swallowed the room. My breath quickened as I walked into the dimly lit office, the weight of the last few days pressing heavily on my chest. Everything had been leading to this moment, and I could feel the air thickening, charged with the anticipation of what I was about to do. Jack was nowhere to be seen, which made my pulse spike with anxiety. His absence didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a setup. He was never too far, always watching, always waiting for me to slip up. I had been in the game long enough to know how it worked. A soft rustle of paper cut through the quiet, and I turned to find Nolan sitting at the desk, his eyes trained on me. His face was unreadable as always, but the flicker of recognition in his eyes gave me pause. You've made your choice then, he asked, his voice as calm as the rest of him. I nodded, tightening my grip on the folder clutched in my hands. Inside it was everything I needed to take control, the final pieces of the puzzle. I've done what's needed, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the anxiety bubbling under the surface. It's all in there. Nolan didn't immediately respond. His hands slid the folder across the desk, examining it with a professional detachment. It was a gesture I knew well. He was assessing, making sure nothing had been missed. But I was certain. I had covered all the angles, every contingency. It's not just the money anymore, is it? Nolan's words were soft, almost a whisper. It's something deeper. I froze, the words sinking into my mind like ice. He was right, of course. The money was just the surface. The game was much bigger than that. It had always been about power, about proving myself. Proving I wasn't the naive woman everyone thought I was. But I wasn't sure if Nolan knew how deep this went. I forced myself to meet his gaze, standing firm. No, it's about making sure I'm never underestimated again. He nodded slowly, almost as if he'd been expecting this. Before I could speak again, the door behind me creaked open. My heart skipped, but I didn't flinch. I knew who it was without having to turn around. Jack's voice was quiet, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. You think you can control this, Maya? I didn't answer right away. My eyes stayed fixed on Nolan's, even as Jack stepped into the room, his presence swallowing up the space. You've been playing a dangerous game, Jack continued, his tone now low and dangerous. I warned you. You'll regret this. I felt a jolt of something. Fear, maybe, but it wasn't enough to break me. Not now. Not after everything I had done. You don't scare me anymore, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. This is over, Jack. There was a silence, thick and suffocating. Jack's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer. He wasn't here just to talk, he was here to fight. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way his jaw clenched. He was ready for a battle, but I was ready too. I didn't want it to come to this, he said, his voice chillingly calm. But you forced my hand. My pulse quickened. Something was off. He wasn't acting like himself. This wasn't the Jack I knew. The man I married would have walked away, retreating into the shadows. But the man standing before me, this was someone else. Someone dangerous. You've always been the puppet, he went on, stepping closer, his gaze piercing. You think you're in control now? You think you've got everything figured out? You don't understand the game you're playing. I swallowed hard, my breath catching in my throat. The tension in the room was suffocating. I was standing on the edge of something, and I wasn't sure which way I would fall. You're right, I said, voice trembling but laced with determination. I don't understand all of it, but I know enough to know you've underestimated me. I stepped back, my hand slipping into my bag, where I knew I had the card that would change everything. It was my ace, the piece I had been holding on to, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. Jack saw the movement, and his expression changed in an instant, from cold to calculating. He stepped forward, but I was already pulling the card out, tossing it onto the desk in front of Nolan. Jack's eyes darted from me to the desk. You're making a big mistake, he spat. Nolan glanced at the card, then back at Jack. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition. I couldn't tell if it was fear or excitement. What's that? Jack demanded, his voice rising. What the hell is this? I didn't answer. Instead, I watched as Nolan slowly reached for the card, his fingers trembling slightly. The truth was out now. I had known it would come to this, the moment when the secrets would unravel. And now that they had, there was no going back. Nolan read the card, his face changing in an instant. This is going to change everything, he muttered under his breath. I wasn't prepared for the next words that left Jack's mouth. You really don't get it, do you? He took a step toward me, his eyes wild now. You're playing with fire, Maya. And when it burns, you won't have anyone to blame but yourself. The tension in the room snapped, and for the first time in this game, I felt a real rush of fear. But it wasn't enough to make me back down. Because in that moment, I realized Jack wasn't my biggest problem. I had just taken a leap into the unknown, and there was no way out now. Everything had changed. The sky outside the penthouse was an unforgiving gray, the kind of sky that made the world feel like it was holding its breath. I stood at the window, the city stretching out before me, cold, indifferent, like everything that had happened these past weeks. But now, as I watched the endless rows of lights, I realized that for the first time in my life, I had nothing to prove. The world didn't get to define me anymore. The events of the past few days ran through my mind in sharp flashes. Jack, Nolan, the threats, the schemes, the lies. It had all come down to this moment. Every decision, every act of defiance had led me here to the precipice, where the world was suddenly full of possibilities I had never imagined for myself. Freedom. It was never about money, not really. Money was just a tool. Power, on the other hand, had always been the real currency. Jack had been right about one thing. I hadn't understood the game, but now I did. I had played every move to perfection, and the reward was mine. The sound of footsteps behind me broke my reverie. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. It had to be him. Nolan's shadow fell across the floor, and for a moment everything was still. Is it over? Nolan's voice was steady, but I could hear the undercurrent of something. Uncertainty, maybe fear. This was bigger than either of us had expected. I turned, meeting his gaze. There was something about the way he looked at me now that felt different, more like an ally than a bystander. For him it is, I said quietly. For me, it's just beginning. Nolan didn't speak immediately. He was processing, always calculating, always 3 steps ahead. But for once, the air between us didn't crackle with the tension of secrets. He'd seen me come into my own, and I could tell he wasn't sure how to feel about it. You don't have to do this, Maya, he said after a moment, his voice almost pleading. You can walk away. Take the money, the power, the freedom. Just leave all of this behind. But I wasn't walking away. Not anymore. Not after everything I had endured. Not after seeing how far they would go to break me. Leaving would mean they win, I said softly. And I'm done letting anyone else decide my fate. I could see the conflict in Nolan's eyes. He'd seen me at my weakest, and now he was seeing me at my strongest. But this wasn't about him or Jack or anyone else. This was about me taking back control. A loud knock on the door broke through the tension, and I turned to find a man in a black suit standing in the doorway, his expression stern but not unfriendly. I have the documents, he said, holding up a thick folder. My heart skipped. This was it, the final step in all of it. I nodded to Nolan, who stepped forward to take the folder from the man. The world seemed to pause for a moment as Nolan flicked through the papers. He paused at one particular document, and for the briefest second his eyes widened. You're sure about this? He asked, looking up at me. Absolutely, I replied. It's the only way. He didn't say anything more, but I could see the gears turning in his mind. He understood now. The gamble I had taken wasn't just for power, it was for survival. Nolan handed me the folder, and I flipped it open, scanning the pages. Everything I needed was there. Proof of Jack's manipulations. Evidence that he had been setting me up from the start. But more than that, there was something else. A clause in his business dealings that could destroy everything he had worked for. It was my trump card, the one thing that could bring him to his knees. As I scanned the final page, the weight of it all hit me. This was the moment when everything would change. No more secrets. No more lies. You really think you can win against him? Nolan asked quietly, stepping back to give me space. Jack's not someone you walk away from easily. I'm not walking away, I said. I'm ending it. I'm taking control. I could feel the finality in my words. This wasn't a victory I had to savor. It was a lesson, a statement. For years, I had let them dictate my worth, my future. But no more. Jack had underestimated me. His schemes, his manipulations, they were built on the assumption that I was just a pawn, someone to be used. But now, with the power in my hands, I was no longer a pawn. I was the queen, and I had learned to play the game better than anyone. The final phone call came an hour later. Jack's voice crackled over the line, full of anger and disbelief. "You're making a huge mistake, Maya. You think this is over? You're just digging your own grave." I could almost hear his frustration building, his desperation to get the upper hand again. But it was too late. The deal was sealed. The papers were signed. And I had won. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice cold and steady. "You've already lost. This isn't about money anymore. It's about me taking my life back." There was a pause, then a low laugh from Jack. "You think you've won? Fine. But don't think for a second that it'll be that easy. You'll regret this." But the line went dead before I could respond. And in that silence, I realized something. I didn't regret a single thing. Not the risks, not the lies, not even the people I had lost along the way. I had broken free from the chains they had tried to bind me with, and I had found my own way to rise. The price of freedom had been high, but in the end it was worth every cost. And as I stood there looking out over the city, I knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The game had changed, and I had won.